The city was built on gold and speed. In the early 1850s, San Francisco was a marvel of radical, explosive growth. It had transformed from a sleepy village of 800 people into a bustling metropolis of 50,000 in just a handful of years. It was a city of 6-story buildings that stood where sand dunes had once been, a place where fortunes were made and lost with dizzying speed. This was the epicenter of the California gold rush, an economy built not on paper, but on hard currency. Tons of raw, heavy gold pulled from the Sierra Nevada foothills. This torrent of wealth needed to be managed, and a new class of financial titans rose to the challenge. Banks, which in the East were centuries-old institutions, were here new, brash, and built as fast as the city itself. They were express companies, gold dust buyers, and speculation houses all in one. Among these, 2 names stood above all others. Adams & Co. had blanketed the state with its express services. But the true giant, the absolute bedrock of West Coast finance, was Page, Bacon & Co. With a sister office in St. Louis, it was the financial artery connecting California to the rest of the nation. In the words of a contemporary, they were the most prominent bankers in California in 1853-55. They were, in short, too big to fail. The trouble, however, began 2,000 miles away, in a place and a manner completely invisible to the citizens of San Francisco. The parent house, Page and Bacon of St. Louis, had become dangerously overextended. It had poured its capital into a massive, speculative railroad project in the American Midwest. When European capital markets, spooked by the Crimean War, dried up, the railroad's financing collapsed. In a desperate, last-ditch effort, the St. Louis house sent a partner to New York for credit and even tried to get Page, Bacon & Co. in San Francisco to ship more gold east. It was too late. On January 14, 1855, Page and Bacon of St. Louis quietly suspended business, its doors locked. In California, it was a perfectly normal Tuesday. In 1855, there was no telegraph linking the coasts. News traveled at the speed of the fastest steamship. For 5 agonizing weeks, the ship carrying the news of the St. Louis failure chugged its way toward the Golden Gate. For 5 weeks, the San Francisco branch of Page, Bacon & Co. operated in blissful, fatal ignorance. Believing their capital was secure, they continued to do what they always did: ship gold. Unaware they were already ghosts, the partners in San Francisco sent $1,968,000 of the firm's last liquid assets east on 5 weekly steamers. They were, in effect, meticulously draining their own lifeblood. The news finally arrived in mid-February, and it landed like a cannonball. The failure of the parent house instantly triggered a crisis of confidence, and that crisis had a name: a bank run. On the night of February 20th, a rival banker, William Tecumseh Sherman, years before he would gain fame as a Civil War general, walked over to the offices of Page, Bacon & Co. Sherman's own bank, Lucas, Turner & Coupecrile, was sound, and he went to see if he could offer assistance, perhaps by exchanging their bullion for his cash. He found the bank's partners in a state of chaos. One of them, Henry Haight, was visibly distressed and unsteady, proclaiming that all the banks would break, that none could possibly pay all their obligations at once. Sherman, a man of cold realism, saw the panic in their eyes. He realized the situation was beyond saving. He informed them he had come to offer help, but, as he later wrote, he would not be drawn into their failure. He left them to their fate. The next day, the run began in earnest. Page, Bacon & Co. had $2 million in deposits. In a single day, a frantic public withdrew $600,000. The bank survived the 21st, but on February 22nd it suspended operations, its doors barred. The failure of the state's largest bank set off a chain reaction. The panic, now unbound, turned on the second-largest bank, Adams & Cuyus. A run began there, and on February 23rd, Adams & Cobier also closed its doors. The day would be remembered by locals as Black Friday. The crisis was catastrophic. Small depositors, miners, and merchants lost their life savings. Real estate values evaporated. In the following weeks, over 200 businesses in San Francisco failed. The city's first golden age had ended, not with a whisper, but with the slam of iron bank doors. The entire financial structure of California was forced to restart, to rebuild itself from the ashes of broken trust. This financial chaos, born from a communication lag of 5 weeks, highlights a desperate global need. What if that 5-week gap could be closed to mere minutes? The dream of closing that gap belonged to Cyrus Westfield. In the mid-1850s, the world was being stitched together by copper wires. Overland telegraphs had already transformed nations, allowing messages to fly across continents almost instantly. But the Atlantic Ocean remained a vast, silent barrier, a 2,000-mile-wide moat separating the Old World from the New. Communication between Europe and America was restricted to the speed of the fastest steamship, a journey of 2 weeks or more. An event that occurred in London was ancient history by the time it was news in New York. A financial collapse, as San Francisco had learned, could happen weeks before anyone knew they were ruined. Field, a New York paper manufacturer who had retired early, became possessed by a singular, audacious idea: to lay a 2,500 nautical-mile telegraph cable on the floor of the North Atlantic, connecting Ireland to Newfoundland. The idea was met with widespread skepticism. The distance was daunting. The deepest submarine cable laid at the time was only 25 miles long. The Atlantic route was 1,600 miles at its shortest and more than 2 miles deep. Yet Field was a man of relentless optimism. He formed the Atlantic Telegraph Company, raising capital from businessmen and securing investments from both the British and American governments. The first attempt, in 1857, was a lesson in humility. The cable was so long and heavy, 2,500 miles of it, that no single ship in the world could carry it. The plan required 2 of the largest naval vessels available, the American USS Niagara and the British HMS Agamemnon, to carry the immense load, half the cable on each. They began laying the cable from Valentia Bay, Ireland, on August 5th. The operation was immediately beset by problems. The cable-laying machinery was clumsy, and the wire itself, a delicate copper core insulated with gutta percha, was prone to snapping under its own immense weight. At 3:45 a.m. on August 11th, after laying just under 400 miles, the Niagara was struck by a wave. The cable's tension was mishandled by the crew, and the wire parted. It vanished into the ocean, sinking 2 miles to the sea floor. With insufficient cable remaining, the expedition was abandoned. Field had failed, but he was not broken. He returned in 1858, this time with a new, even more daring plan. The 2 ships would meet in the middle of the Atlantic, splice their 2 halves of the cable together, and sail in opposite directions toward their home continents. They sailed from England in June, but were immediately ambushed by one of the most ferocious storms ever recorded in the North Atlantic. For over a week, the vessels were tossed, and the Agamemnon, overloaded and top-heavy, nearly foundered, its crew thrown about in the chaos. When the seas finally calmed, they reached their rendezvous point on June 25th. They spliced the cable and began to sail. After the Agamemnon had paid out more than 140 miles, the cable snapped again. The mission was abandoned. They returned to Ireland, refueled, and in a display of sheer, stubborn perseverance, sailed back to the mid-Atlantic to try a 3rd time. This time, it worked. The ships laid their cable without a major incident. On August 4th, 1858, the Niagara arrived in Trinity Bay, Newfoundland. On August 16th, the connection was complete. The first official message was transmitted, a 98-word letter of congratulations from Queen Victoria to President James Buchanan. The world erupted. The implications for business and international relations were profound, a true revolution in human connection. Cyrus Field was the man who had united the human race. But the triumph was hollow. From the beginning, the signal was agonizingly weak. The cable, acting as a giant capacitor, stored and smeared the electrical pulses, making them nearly unreadable. It took a painfully long time to send and receive even a single letter. The company's chief electrician, Wildman Whitehouse, who had conveniently avoided the voyages himself, grew impatient. He theorized that the weak signal could be boosted by increasing the power. Overruling the project's more astute engineers, he applied higher and higher levels of voltage to the line. This decision proved fatal. The excessive voltage burned through the cable's fragile insulation. The signal grew weaker, then garbled, then silent. After just 23 days of operation, somewhere on the dark, cold floor of the North Atlantic, the line went dead. The public's elation turned to suspicion. Newspapers and investors, feeling deceived, began to whisper that the entire venture had been a hoax, a massive stock fraud. Cyrus Field's dream was in ruins, his great wire broken, his reputation destroyed. While one man's grand vision was sinking to the ocean floor, another man, in the chaotic city of San Francisco, was about to lose his own fortune, setting the stage for a different kind of public spectacle. Before the emperor, there was the merchant. Joshua Abraham Norton was not a 49er who arrived in California with a pickaxe and a prayer. He was a businessman, a 49er who arrived with capital and a plan. He was a product of the global frontier. Born in England in 1818, he was raised in South Africa, where his parents were part of the 1820 settlers, a government-backed colonization program designed to establish a British presence on the Cape Colony's frontier. He was not a stranger to the logistics of a port city. He was trained in commerce at his father's side, working in the family's ship chandlery business in Cape Town, supplying vessels with the necessities for long voyages. Following the death of his parents, his mother in 1846 and his father a year later, Norton decided to leave South Africa. He sailed west, seeking a new frontier. After a possible layover in Rio de Janeiro, he arrived in San Francisco in late 1849. The popular legend, repeated for a century, is that Norton arrived with a $40,000 inheritance from his father's estate. This claim, however, remains entirely undocumented. The untold truth is that whatever his starting sum, his success was his own, and it was immediate. He was perfectly suited for the commercial chaos of the gold rush. While others scrambled for gold in the hills, Norton focused on the needs of the scramblers. He became a commodities middleman and a real estate speculator, two of the most lucrative and dangerous professions in the city. He was, by all accounts, brilliant at it. He established Joshua Norton and Kubert and set up an office in the heart of the booming port. His business acumen was evident in his real estate plays. As the shallow Yerba Buena Cove was being filled in to create new, valuable downtown land, Norton bought made ground lots at auction. He acquired 3 of the 4 corners at the intersection of Sansom and Jackson. He also bought a pair of water lots near Rincon Point. In a move of particular shrewdness, he converted an abandoned brig that was grounded on one of the lots into a secure warehouse. This decision, more than any other, demonstrated his foresight. On May 4, 1851, one of the city's great devastating fires tore through the downtown, wiping out vast swathes of inventory and ruining countless merchants. But Norton's warehouse and the valuable goods stored inside stood safe at Rincon Point, far from the conflagration. In the fire's aftermath, with demand for all goods at a premium and his supplies intact, he made a killing. By 1852, Joshua Norton was no longer just a merchant. He was a merchant prince. His fortune was estimated at $250,000, a staggering sum for the time. He was a respected, prominent, and embedded member of the city's new elite. He was wealthy enough and trusted enough to be named a charter member of the first San Francisco Citizen Safety Group, an association formed to impose order on the chaotic city. Norton's success was built on his mastery of San Francisco's volatility. He had profited from scarcity, and he had won. He was, by all accounts, on a trajectory to be one of the founders of a new dynasty. But the very skill he possessed, the willingness to gamble on scarcity, would be the instrument of his downfall. In late 1852, Norton saw the opportunity of a lifetime. A severe famine in China had led the government to ban all exports of rice. San Francisco, with its large and growing population, consumed vast quantities of rice. The supply dried up. Norton, who owned a rice mill, watched as the price climbed from 4 cents a pound to 9 cents, then 18, and finally to 36 cents. His mill was dry. Then, one day in December, he was approached by a shipping agent from the German firm of Godefroy and Sillam. A ship, the Glide, was in the bay, carrying a massive cargo, 200,000 pounds of Peruvian rice. The agent offered him the entire exclusive cargo at 12.5 cents a pound, a $25,000 investment. At the current retail price, the cargo was worth over $72,000. He believed he could corner the entire market. Joshua Norton, the master speculator, agreed to the deal. By late 1852, Joshua Norton was one of the most successful men in the city, a master of speculation. But in this high-stakes environment, one miscalculation could erase a fortune. The rice deal was Joshua Norton's undoing, but not in the simple way the legend is usually told. The popular story paints a picture of a man blindsided by fate. He buys the rice, and then, to his complete shock, a dozen other ships laden with Peruvian rice sail into the harbor, flooding the market and driving the price down to 3 cents a pound. It is a clean, dramatic narrative of hubris meeting irony. The untold history, however, buried in the shipping manifests of the daily Alta California newspaper, is more complex and reveals more about Norton's character. There was no sudden, unexpected flood. Rice shipments had been arriving all along, 3 or 4 a week. Norton's cargo was simply the largest to arrive in a month, not the only one. His gamble wasn't on no rice, it was on his rice being large enough to control the price. He had simply, and badly, miscalculated the market. Even so, he might have survived the financial loss. What truly destroyed him was not just the market, but his own stubborn insistence on justice. After making a $2,000 down payment and taking delivery of the 200,000-pound cargo, Norton refused to pay the remaining $23,000 balance. His reason, he contended the rice was of a lower quality than had been promised. The consignors, the Ruiz brothers, were not interested in this excuse. They promptly sued him for breach of contract on January 21, 1853. This began a ruinous legal battle. At some point early in the proceedings, his partner, William Sim, the Coquets in Joshua Norton and Coast, deserted him, leaving Norton to face the suit alone. The case of Ruiz versus Norton dragged on for nearly 2 years. This was the fatal period. Deeper analysis of his finances suggests that Norton was already overextended and carrying heavy debt before the rice deal ever materialized. His wealth, like that of many speculators, was fragile, highly leveraged, and tied up in real estate holdings that he often shared with partners. He did not have the controlling interest or the liquid assets to survive a prolonged legal fight. The rice deal was not the singular cause of his ruin. It was the catalyst that lit the fuse on an already precarious financial structure. In October 1854, the California Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling against him. The decision was a catastrophe. It triggered a small avalanche of district court lawsuits. All his other creditors, who had perhaps been waiting patiently, now saw their chance and rushed to collect before his assets vanished. In November 1854, the first sheriff's sale notices appeared in the Daily Alta California, announcing the court-ordered foreclosure and public sale of his property interests. His half-interest in lots in North Beach, his valuable water lots at Rincon Point, his business properties at Sansom and Jackson, all were sold off one by one to the highest bidder at the courthouse door. By August 1856, he was ruined. Joshua Norton, the merchant prince, was forced to declare bankruptcy. The insolvency calendar, published in the Sacramento Daily Union, was stark. Liabilities, $55,811. Assets, $15,000. For the next 3 years, he largely vanished. The myth is that he disappeared completely, a broken man who went into reclusive depression. But this, too, is an exaggeration. The public record shows he remained in the city, a shadow of his former self, still trying to find his footing. He served on a jury in September 1857. In August 1858, he ran a small, unsuccessful ad in the newspaper announcing his independent candidacy for U.S. Congress. He was still trying and failing to work within the system. Then, on September 17, 1859, having exhausted every conventional path, he chose an unconventional one. He walked into the offices of the San Francisco Daily Evening Bulletin, a prominent newspaper, and hand-delivered a letter to the editor. The editor, perhaps for his own amusement or sensing a story, published it. It read, "At the peremptory request and desire of a large majority of citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, formerly of Algoa Bay, Cape of Good Hope, and now, for the last 9 years and 10 months past of San Francisco, California, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States, and in virtue of the authority thereby in me vested, do hereby order and direct the representatives of the different states of the Union to assemble in Musical Hall of this city, on the 1st day of February next, then and there to make such alterations in the existing laws of the Union as may ameliorate the evils under which the country is laboring." The Bulletin published his proclamation. And with that single act of print, the ruined merchant was gone, and Emperor Norton Thune was born. The city of San Francisco, a place built on reinvention and populated by those who had fled convention, did not just tolerate Joshua Norton's proclamation, it embraced it. The ruined merchant was reborn as His Imperial Majesty, Norton I, and for the next 21 years he reigned as one of the most beloved and famous figures in American history. He crafted a new persona, swapping his business suit for an elaborate blue military uniform, complete with gold-plated epaulettes. It was a second-hand gift given to him by the officers of the United States Army post at the Presidio, who were among the first to play along with his new role. He ruled by walking. He spent his days inspecting the city's sidewalks, parks, and libraries, often accompanied by a cane or walking stick. In the evenings, he was a frequent and welcome guest at theatrical performances, with theaters across the city reserving a seat for him. His rule was conducted through imperial decrees, which he would deliver to newspaper offices. The press, finding him a wonderful source of civic amusement and surprisingly sharp commentary, published them. He issued over 500 such proclamations in his lifetime. On October 12, 1859, just weeks into his reign, he abolished the U.S. Congress, citing the undue influence of political sects. When Congress naturally failed to comply, he ordered the Army to clear the halls of Congress. Later, he dissolved the Republic itself and in 1869 issued a proclamation to abolish and dissolve the Democratic and Republican parties. He took an interest in foreign affairs, adding the title Protector of Mexico by 1866, following the French invasion of that country. Some of his decrees were of a more local and famously visionary nature. He repeatedly issued proclamations calling for the construction of a suspension bridge to connect San Francisco and Oakland via Goat Island, today known as Yerba Buena Island. On March 23, 1872, he decreed that a suspension bridge be built from Oakland Point to Goat Island, and thence to Telegraph Hill. When this was ignored, he also called for a survey to determine the practicability of a tunnel underwater for a railroad. Decades after his death, both the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and the Transbay Tube were built, almost exactly as he had decreed. He also famously, though the decree's authenticity is debated, declared that the abominable word Frisco shall not be used, deeming it a high misdemeanor, punishable by a $25 fine. His most brilliant move, however, was a return to his old world, finance. He began issuing his own scrip, or promissory notes, in denominations from 50 cents to $10. These notes, printed for free by local firms like Cuddy and Hughes, were issued by the imperial government of Norton and promised to pay the holder the sum in the year 1880, with interest. This brings us to the core of the query, that San Francisco banks honored this currency. This is the most powerful and persistent myth of his reign, but it is not, in the strictest sense, true. The untold history is that the formal banks, the very institutions that had seen him fail, wanted nothing to do with him. At least one, the First National Bank, explicitly refused to cash his notes. He promptly issued a new proclamation foreclosing upon them. The banks, as one analysis notes, refused to fund his inventions. The truth is more profound. It wasn't the banks that honored his scrip, it was the people. Restaurants, his own landlady, local shops, and theaters accepted his notes as payment. It was a brilliant, city-wide accommodation, part affection, part charity, and part a clever marketing stunt for any business that could claim to be the emperor's by-appointment choice. The people of San Francisco, in a collective act of goodwill, created a microeconomy for their emperor, allowing the man who had lost a $250,000 fortune to live with dignity on his own terms. The city's protective affection for him was codified in 1867. A new, overzealous special officer, a private security guard named Armand Barbier, arrested Norton for vagrancy. The public reaction was immediate and ferocious. The city's newspapers erupted in scathing editorials. The Daily Alta wrote that Norton had shed no blood, robbed no one, and despoiled no country, which is more than can be said of his fellows in that line. The public outcry reached the office of Police Chief Patrick Crowley, who, sensing a major civic uproar, acted swiftly. He ordered Norton released and issued a formal public apology on behalf of the police force. From that day forward, his imperial status was, in a very real sense, official. When Emperor Norton passed a police officer on the street, the officer would salute him. But as his reign continued, his story became entangled with two other famous city residents, an association that would define his memory, even if it was untrue. The most stubborn myth of Emperor Norton's reign, the one that persists despite all evidence, is that he was the master of two famous stray dogs, Bummer and Lazarus. The dogs were real, and they were San Francisco celebrities in their own right. They were a pair of inseparable strays who roamed the city in the early 1860s, famed for their expertise at dispatching the rats that infested the city. They were so beloved that in 1862, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, in a formal session, exempted Bummer and Lazarus by name from the city's strict anti-stray ordinance, granting them free rein. But the untold truth is, they were not the emperor's pets. There is not a single contemporary account that links them. The myth was born from the pen of a young French cartoonist named Edward Jump, who found it amusing to lampoon the city's notables together. His most famous cartoon, The Three Bummers, depicted Norton eating at a free lunch counter while the two dogs waited patiently for scraps. Norton, far from being amused, was reportedly outraged. He felt the depiction of His Majesty, in the company of lowly dogs, was an affront to his imperial dignity. When he saw the cartoon displayed in a shop window, he struck the glass with his walking stick, smashing his stick in the process. While Norton was battling cartoonists, the man whose dream had died on the ocean floor was mounting an impossible comeback. After the 1858 cable failure, Cyrus Field spent years in the wilderness, relentlessly raising new funds. He knew the cable had to be stronger, and he needed a ship large enough to carry all 2,600 miles of it in a single, colossal hold. He found it in Isambard Kingdom Brunel's SS Great Eastern, a commercial failure but the largest ship in the world, a true Leviathan. He converted it into a cable-laying vessel. His first attempt with this new ship in 1865 was another heartbreaking failure. More than halfway across the Atlantic, the new, stronger cable snapped and was lost on the ocean floor. But in 1866, Field sailed again. On July 13th, the Great Eastern steamed west from Ireland, paying out the wire in a steady, unbroken stream. On July 27, 1866, they arrived at the small fishing village of Heart's Content, Newfoundland. The cable was brought ashore, tested, and found to be perfect. Field sent the first message, "Thank God, the cable is laid." But he wasn't done. In an act of untold mastery, he took the Great Eastern back to the middle of the ocean, to the very spot where the 1865 cable had vanished. After 30 attempts, his crew fished for the lost cable with a grappling hook, retrieving it from the deep, splicing it to a new length, and completing a second working line. After a decade of ruinous failure, Cyrus Field had finally, and doubly, tied the world together. Cyrus Field's success was a triumph of capital and industry. Emperor Norton's was a triumph of personality and shared belief. His reign, which began in financial ruin, lasted for 21 years. It ended on the evening of January 8, 1880. He was walking from his simple room at the Eureka Lodgings to attend a monthly debate at the Hastings Society. At the corner of California and DuPont Streets, the emperor collapsed. He died on the sidewalk before he could be taken to a hospital. He was found to have only a few dollars in his pocket, but the city he had claimed as his empire would not let him have a pauper's burial. His former business associates, the Gentlemen of the Pacific Club, took up a collection to fund a proper funeral. His body lay in state. The told history and the untold history now conflict. Later legends, repeated in books and articles, claim 10,000, even 30,000 people attended his funeral, with a procession 2 miles long. The contemporary San Francisco Chronicle report from 1880, however, states that while people lined the streets for the first block or two, there were only 3 carriages and about 30 people at the burial service. But in the case of Emperor Norton, the legend is, perhaps, the truer story. It reflects the city's desire to honor the man who had given them a harmless, benevolent monarchy. The San Francisco Chronicle reported the news on its 8th page, under a headline that would echo for a century. Le roi est mort.